Hi, Rob. Thank you very much for
Hey.
taking your time today. You can start giving your intro. Maybe you can introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, so my name is Robert Axelsson, or Rob for short. I come from Norway, but I've lived in Austria for the last 8 years. When it comes to developer relations, it's not so long since I got my first job in that field, but I've gone a longer route of learning to code myself back 6.5 years ago, I think. At that time, I had been working multiple different jobs, different careers, from sales to customer support and stagehand, sound light, etc., etc. But I've always been interested in computers. I just didn't take enough maths to get into computer science in Norway. Though looking back, I think I could have managed if I realized that it wasn't as hard as I imagined. So fast forward to 6.5 years ago or so, maybe 7 years, I started to look into learning to code myself online because I taught myself enough system administration with Linux to do like a side project or like a small agency with a friend to make WordPress websites for B2B customers. And that was a nice experience, though we didn't earn enough to live on. We had a few deals and it was nice. And through that experience of realizing that for this work-related project, I could learn to do self-hosted or VPS-hosted Linux to put our WordPress sites on. I wanted to try again to learn to program. So long story short, I started my first meetup then, Free Code Camp Vienna, which is also the platform I used to learn to code, plus supplementing with other courses. Within a year or so, I got my first developer job. Then I switched job a couple of years afterwards, and the new company agreed to cover my time spent on the meetups. I had then 3 meetups that I had started. So another one was Golang centric, Vienna Go. The other one was, or still is, Vue.js Vienna, because we used Vue.js at work. And then fast forward to about a year ago, I got developer advocate job at Dynatrace, and things have really developed internally in the way that I now build a team around developer relations, which is challenging and rewarding, and there's so much to do. And the only thing to add to that kind of, mini bio is that I've also already wanted to get into developer relations for, let's say, something like 4 years. So I've been in the community, both partaking in chat forums and stuff, but also kept up with the trend. So it's nice to finally be working with these topics.
Great, very interesting. And I always, whenever I hear about developer relation roles, like everybody has a different paths. That's really interesting to see that you are coming from a meetup space, sales role and consulting role, and the WordPress development and meetup. Maybe can you elaborate a little bit on like, how did you land into developer relation? How does the meetup influenced you to land into your current career as a developer relation lead?
Yeah. Good question, big question. Just to add, I did work maybe in total like 4.5, 5 years as a front-end developer. So back to when I started Free Code Camp, my first job was as a front-end developer. So that's of course also was, helpful when applying for developer relations jobs. I kind of, we don't need to tell the whole life story, but back to when I was a teenager, I was always the awkward kid in class who, if no one else raised their hand when the teacher said, hey, can someone volunteer to do this or be the, class representative in the student union, I would like reluctantly at the end be like, okay, if no one else, I can. So I was always drawn to this kind of like responsibility, or I guess leadership, but more in a organizing things and being part of that. So I've had multiple roles, both school-wise and volunteer organizations and such. Also, when we had joining university, my second year, I volunteered to, welcome a new group of students and then show them about student life. So when I got into organizing a meetup, which was mainly driven because Free Code Camp, when you start, freecodecamp.com, when you start their course, they encourage you quite early on to seek out a local study group. There was none for Vienna. So then they say, hey, you can start one. So they suggest to do that via Facebook because that's what they had back then. I think they've changed that since then. And no one joined. And so I started one locally, but no one joined. Next day, my wife joined. We were 2, but it still felt a bit lonely. So then I reached out to Quincy Larson, who is the founder of Free Code Camp, and asked, hey, there's a meetup scene here in Vienna, and I've attended a couple of WordPress meetups and so on. I was thinking about starting one for Free Code Camp. And he was like, yeah, sure, great idea. But just know that it costs money to have a Free Code Camp license. So I started it. And then it kind of trickled slowly, went to more and more members, both in the Facebook group and the meetup group. And the first meetup we had on Starbucks, I think we were 7 people. The next one was in a co-working space where we kept doing for a couple of years. And it slowly grew from the first one there was maybe again around 7, 8, 9, 10 people. That was more of let's sit down and code together. And then since I knew the meetup scene in Vienna, it's normally 1 or 2 talks and then you socialize, maybe you have a sponsor, if not people buy drinks and stuff. So I wanted to try that out and it was worked well. It was nice, a lot of work because to get speakers is not so easy. So in periods I would have to give a lot of talks myself, but that was also a nice experience. And to be honest, hinting back to my awkward school years, believe it or not, I was let's call it social anxiety ridden kid. It's a longer story. So I was always, sweating under my arms and feeling uncomfortable in social settings. So through this meetup experience, I actually became more comfortable because I enjoyed being in this role of, people have their attention on me because they're expecting me to run the meetup. And that kind of process over these 6 years have actually made me get rid of my social anxiety, really. I guess it's called exposure therapy or something. So that was like a win-win for me. At the same time, I saw that I both liked coding and learning it, talking with other students. And I also liked the mix of getting to know people and the nerdy subculture of developers. So I was always interested in making people feel welcome, try to greet as many people by hand pre-pandemic as possible, make them feel welcome. It also, I know, breaks the barrier. So, after a talk or when they're a bit more comfortable, they might approach you and keep talking. So that's been like a core to what I really wanted to build on. And then after 2 years, I expanded with the 2 more meetups because that by then I had realized that, hey, there's developer relations, developer advocacy. I like this, maybe I can put in a little bit more effort, make it look even better on the resume. So I did 2 more. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it was a nice experience. Then we had, with months where I would have 3 meetups. If I wanted to have, and that period in the beginning, I did a mistake of always wanting to have 2 talks. So if I got a speaker for one of my meetups, it might not get a second one. That meant that some months I actually gave 3 different talks on 3 different subjects.
Oh.
So after a year, I stopped doing that. So my ambition was to have at least 1 talk, which was less work. And how did I leverage that? So to be honest, already back after I'd worked a couple of years, meaning around 1.5 years, 2 years in my first developer job, I already started applying for developer relations jobs. I still have the list somewhere, but I think I applied for at least 110 or more jobs. I got invited to quite a few interviews. And I think I made it to the last round in a couple of them, but it always came down to either I was too junior or there was not the right technology fit. Like if I apply for, some database technology that is, or SaaS that is Java centric, and I mostly know front end. But it was a nice experience, made some connections, and I got the next job then more like referred by an ex-colleague, to a new company. And there was a good match in the sense that they really liked my work on the meetups. So in the process, I was asking them, hey, I would like to keep the meetups. Can we have them in your location? Yes. Can I maybe even like use my work time to organize and host and such? Yeah, sure. Up until a certain percentage, you can. So that was a real like value add to me, and it gave me like a foot inside the door. But I would work, 90% as a developer still. And I was happy there, also because they had this focus on meetups, and we kind of looked into ways to have me do more meetups and less coding. So gradually transitioning a bit, maybe mixing in recruiting. But long story short, for various reasons, and then pandemic hit, that didn't work out. So eventually I started, that's not true. I didn't start looking. LinkedIn pushed some job ads in my face, and one of them I was curious about, and it kept popping up again. I was like, okay, let me read this one. And I had one interview with, or two interviews with Dynatrace, where I work now, and it really was a good timing and a good fit for my skill set. When it comes to the path, I also was able to previously, I worked on community in the sense that I was involved with a couple of open source projects, not so much on the code part, but on documentation, on triaging of issues. And then 2 years ago, I was at Vue.js Amsterdam, met other local Vue.js, also leaders of, in their country, local Vue.js groups. And together we started a Discord server to kind of unite people around the world in the Vue.js community. And that grew into us hosting our own online conferences. So in the first one, I was more behind the scenes and not as active as the main hosts. But that was a quick success, because in the early days of the pandemic, people were new to online, and you got a lot of views. We had, I think, 3 more, 2 of which I hosted. Less attendees because people were more burned out on online meetups and Zoom, but it was still a nice experience. And in that process, in that time, I also I volunteered to host community meetings for Vue.js, to kind of have people a weekly way of joining a video call and talk a bit about local struggles, how is meetups going, Vue.js community in general, and at least kept that consistent for half a year. And then afterwards, I've also picked it up every now and then when there are topics to discuss. So all of these things being the meetups plus the online community work, I was always also able to sort of leverage in terms of putting it on the resume, mentioning it in the interviews. I've also been blogging, as I think, a lot of us, we blog for a while and then our blog dies and maybe we pick it up again. And the last relevant thing that I can think of is, I can't remember how many years ago, but let's say 6 years ago, I decided to try a side project for basically like a magazine style blog for meditation. A bit curated and a bit like articles that I wrote from scratch that hopefully was insightful, and some guest bloggers. And not my only ambition, but one thing I managed to do was to have daily content for over a year. I eventually sold it for much less than I felt it was worth because I didn't manage to monetize it. But throughout that process, I also really got to find a bit my voice and style when it came to blog content, more in the conversational style. So that was a long answer, but I think those are kind of like getting relevant experience, applying a lot, and then suddenly when the time was right, I the right opportunity came across and I grabbed it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know you are hiring for developer advocates now, and what would you advise? Like it can be a developer who's looking for wanted to move a career change. Hey, I look like a developer advocate. I want to give it a try. Or someone wants to give a try with a, hey, this is a role. How should I start? This looks really interesting because there are a lot of things. The developer relation is a bigger umbrella. Like you can think about developer marketing, community management, developer advocacy, a lot of things. What would you advise for someone like, hey, this is what I can do to get started from your experience?
It really depends, right? Because I have some priorities now when I'm hiring for my team that might change in half a year or a year as the team grows. That's a good question. I think the main key that I can give, which has been the same for me both with trying to get my previous jobs, with this one being the exception, has been if I felt I didn't get enough interviews or going further enough, I would try to solve it by just sitting down, and the only thing I focused on getting done for the coming weeks when I had time was to send more applications. So I'm only saying this because you need to find the right fit, and more applications exposes you to more people, and eventually I think you'll find the match that is right for you. It depends on the technology that you're hiring for, from my perspective. So, and also the current team composition. So we have been able now to afford to take on someone that was a good fit in one area, but not as much developer experience. But we know that we have enough work for her to address, even with, and try to onboard her on the developer topic. So we because of the experience there in terms of community and a very versatile background in sort of like the relations part, that fit. Normally now we are 5 people growing to 6 people next month. People have different skill sets, which I like it to have that way, so we can fill out each other's weaknesses and strengths and play on the strengths. I'm trying to find a concise answer there, but it's hard because it really is what I've already said, right? It's
got it.
From my perspective, I have to look at individual applications and see, does it make sense to have someone with this composition right now? No, but it might in half a year. But I'm often willing to at least have the first talk so we can figure out and connect and maybe keep in touch. And back to your question of what can a candidate do, I think sometimes I have to dig a lot to find talks or videos of their talks. So examples I would really highlight. I did that in my application, my resume. For the last rounds when I was looking for jobs, I kind of even had like thumbnail pictures of 3 videos, I think, on top of my PDF resume with links. If you have examples of written work, that's helpful, repos or GitHub profile, all of these things. Make sure that you have pinned stuff on your GitHub profile so that the stuff that you want to highlight is actually highlighted on top there. Sometimes people neglect that.
Mm-hmm.
And then also some resumes have a lot of unrelated and are very long, like almost covering their whole work history. And then I would just focus more on the relevant stuff, even if it's 10 years in the past. If you worked as a teacher for English classes or something that you can kind of like make related to this field, because communication is important, or being a good communicator. Yeah, those things. And when it comes to, if you do get invited to an interview, I'm not sure how much advice I can give, because I tend to do a bit untraditional interviews in the sense that I kind of share a bit of me and try to be open and friendly, so people can open a bit to feel that they can be safe, because ultimately it's just getting to know the person. I don't want it to be a static, hey, answer these 20 questions and half of them are strange kind of situation. So my main goal is just to get a feel for the person and to answer some of the questions about the resume and maybe elaborate and see, did I understand this experience correctly, or is there stuff I haven't, even realized that was relevant, and then take it from there. And then, honest with the candidate, hey, I have a feeling it's a good match, or these are the 2 points I need to consider. You will hear from us, but I need to figure out if we can make this work given that. And then I will tell them maybe the team composition and why it's not a fit right now. So really, for me, it was initially when I looked for jobs, it was a lack of technical skills. So I kind of realized that, okay, a couple more years as a front-end developer will probably help. Then I can keep looking. When it comes to the communication skills and soft skills, and you mentioned community management, it's also for potentially tech writing. Not all developer advocacy jobs will have a focus on it, but some do. Then there's stuff you can do on your own if you are driven to, often do stuff in your spare time, which shouldn't be necessary, but switching careers, I've kind of learned that, especially then, you kind of have to, both switching from other career to developer and then from developer to developer relations. And that being said, I have examples even here in my company where people have transitioned internally from jobs that wasn't developer relations and kind of just fell into it. So if it's a company that you really like and you like the technology and you're comfortable with thinking long-term, you could also try and get in there as a developer and then kind of transition.
Yeah, I think it's really very, very well thought answer. I can summarize kind of like you're more, if you're looking for a change, like more focused on tailored communication, like, hey, put your relevant content. It can be on GitHub pinning, or it can be on your resume, like talk about what's most important or relevant.
Yeah.
And I think you also talked about more from your hiring perspective, like, hey, this is what you look for. More openness, like it might not be fit today, it might be fit another 6 months. Like you are here to find out, like, hey, let's work together. It's not like one direction. It's about finding a two-way. What's the perfect match from both sides? It can be from a candidate side and also from a hiring team. Like we want to see a best match there. I think you spent like a significant of time or a kind of a side project on meetups. Wanted to understand from you, like, how does it influence in your current role, like from a company perspective? Like, hey, I got a good experience in meetups on hosting and organizing, even at some extent hosting an event. What does it mean for a company? Does it mean that you now know that a better way to reach developer, or you know that how you can kind of bring awareness about the product to the community? How do you feel, or how do you think about your meetup skill is applied in your current role?
Good question. For my specific role, it was listed first as a community manager, and that's also why I didn't have a look at the first time when I saw the job ad. Then I looked again, because it's out, so I think LinkedIn has this like your X amount of percentage fit for this. And I was like, oh, am I really? And then I read, and it felt more like a developer advocacy job than a community manager. And in the interview process, I also told them, and I pointed out at the end, like, would it be possible to hire me as a developer advocate and not a community manager? Because again, I feel like the job description fits better. And they were like, yeah, sure, let's do it. That makes sense. So in this, I cannot say everything that we're working on now because it's not public yet. So for now, we are focusing on internal enablement because our developers need to switch front-end tech stack and also some other technology to kind of get their future projects done, which might touch the external audience later on, which means my team will get also to do external developer relations tasks, which is exciting. So we're planning for that. And I'm saying this because we have already an open source design system from Dynatrace called Barista. So the initial thought was that I would kind of take that community management and issue triaging and stuff around that. And they already hinted at some internal enablement and that kind of stuff. So that was like an obvious fit in terms of I already handle a community in person. I have experience with, sort of online community, both in the virtual, like, online events, but also in, forums, moderating and issue triaging and kind of sort of project management kind of stuff. So that felt relevant. But I think if you talk more broadly, if you're applying for a developer advocacy job, that seems that they are willing to take on someone like who's junior, or you want to at least emphasize that you have X amount of years of experience on projects of your own, and you want to kind of leverage to say, hey, if you hire me as junior, I won't be junior because I already have experience. I think, as with any application, back to like tailoring your resume, I think it's a bit also about tailoring your past experience. And it's hard. Like for me, it's not so hard to, in a setting like this, to kind of brainstorm and kind of, okay, I understand in an interview, I'm the interviewee and someone is interviewing me, and they talk about the job and the tasks. I at least have done a good job in sort of understanding it and then kind of highlighting how my experience could be relevant to it, even if it's, as you were saying, meetup community versus an online community versus what we're kind of doing here as well, enabling the internal developer community of our internal developers. So I kind of embrace that angle of, hey, I think it's a really good fit for me because I've been doing many of these things, just not getting paid for it. It's been part of what I've been doing for the last, I don't know, at that point, maybe 6 years, no, five something years. And it has also been the case, and back to my social anxiety, to be honest, as I've switched jobs over the last years in parallel with the meetup work, which have kind of like grown, especially on, let's call it social skills or soft skills. Every time I switched a job, I felt like I could lower my shoulders a bit more and be a bit more myself, and not kind of like, be silent and try to be half afraid of like, how should I respond? How should I act? How should I be? So in this job, I kind of embraced it, and it was easier for me because I was hired to do stuff that I, like my meetup persona stuff work. So when I joined here, my meetup persona, I feel, is also a bit more my authentic me, but maybe a bit exaggerated. So when I joined here, in my previous job, I'd learned that just talk to people and they will, tell you if it's some room for collaboration or not, or, hey, we have a marketing department. I had a CEO who was very open to ideas. Let's spar ideas with him. So I kind of like, every time I got introduced to new people, I kind of tried to find out if there was some synergy. So I took that with me in this role, where I kind of was quite free to plan and implement things. And just made it my job to just set up meetings with, tons and tons of people, of course, respecting their time and starting at half-an-hour meetings just for me to understand what they were doing and to understand the organization better. So that was really helpful to me in terms of, it's not actually answering your question, but I'm saying it because it's an example of me being able to take something that I did on my spare time and really be able to leverage it, both my company and me internally, because my approach to meetups with having a friendly, open, welcoming, open communication, being transparent with people, not any sleazy politics, but more like, hey, this is me, this is what I'm working on, I'm interested in this, can you tell me some stuff? Oh, cool, nice, I didn't know about that. And kind of make it like a friendly conversation as in a meetup, which really has worked for me. And my company, to be honest, though, is really good at open communication between people, between teams. So I think in a different company that was more corporate-y feely and a bit more stiff, maybe I would have had to do it differently. But here it was, I could actually demonstrate that the experience I had in the past was relevant to how we drive things internally.
That's really nice to see that you applying. It's really benefits your in your current role. Maybe my final question is like, where do you get inspired? Like, what blogs do you follow? What authors or books you recommend?
Yeah, great questions. I follow main as my anchor for my sort of like trend and news is more a couple of newsletters.
Mm-hmm.
So there is one called DevRel Weekly.
Mm-hmm.
It's simply devrelweekly.com from the beautiful Mary Grace, who also wrote a book on developer relations, which I would recommend. And then the guys behind DevRelCon also have a newsletter. I think it's called the developerrelations.com newsletter. It's not as frequent as Mary's, but it's also nice. A more recent one is Developer Avocados Weekly, which I think you just have to Google because they are delivering it via tiny letter. But Developer Avocados Weekly. And then also I would recommend, which was my early entry into this field and kind of like trying to get in contact with people who already worked in developer relations before I did, was the DevRel Collective, which is devrelcollective.fun, which is, you can request an invite. It's a Slack group where a lot of both aspiring developer relations professionals, but also existing, professionals are communicating. So that would be a good place. They also have job channels and stuff like this. I think that's mainly it, because what I normally consume is like when I go through every couple of weeks my backlog of newsletters, then I will see what's relevant and interesting to me at the moment. And also there's a section in some of these on podcasts or interesting videos and stuff like this. So yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really great. Thanks, Rob, for sharing me your experience and insights. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.